Dweeb, the time is upon us. The ritual has begun. Oh wow, the ritual? I remember hearing about that. It was important, right? Once I finish this spell, you must place the crystal onto the altar. Understood. You can count on me. The stars align. The veil weakens. Dweeb, it is time. The crystal. Okay, I just need to... hang on. Now, Dweeb. I'm trying. I'm looking for it. What do you mean looking for it? You picked it up. You have it. I know, but this inventory interface. I have 7 bags. I don't know how to switch between them. Why do you have 7 bags? I don't know. I don't remember. I think I need to rebind the button to switch bags or something. The world is ending. Okay, I think I have it. Why are you sleeping? That wasn't the right button. Wake up, Dweeb! Wait, why am I carrying 6 broken rakes? If you're here watching this, that means that 3 things are probably true. You have a handheld, you're into DOS RPGs, and you're a dork. Welcome, my friend. You are among your people now. A few weeks ago, I made a video about running DOS games on Android handhelds. That was more of a broad overview. Look at all this cool stuff you can do kind of video. This one is for the sickos, because running a DOS RPG and actually playing a DOS RPG are 2 very different things. Back in the day, PC developers treated control schemes the way mad scientists treat laboratory safety regulations. They didn't give a crap. Every game wanted to do its own thing. Some used only the keyboard, some used only the mouse, some used both, some expected you to have 17 fingers and a map of keyboard shortcuts printed out and stuck beside your monitor. Every game had different movement, menus were different, inventory screens were different. It felt like half the time the key bindings seemed to have been assigned by throwing darts at a keyboard. And then you load one of these games into DOSBox on a handheld and realize the default controls work for approximately 3.5 games. The good news is that after spending an unreasonable amount of my life poking at old RPGs and pressing random buttons until something useful happened, I've discovered that almost all of these games can be made surprisingly comfortable on a handheld. No mouse, no keyboard, just the buttons already attached to the little electronic rectangle that you're holding. I'm going to show you the exact method that I use. The examples will be on Android, but this same approach works on Linux handhelds, Raspberry Pi setups, and even PC emulation setups like Retrobat. I'll cover some of that stuff in another video, which I'll link below. Today, we're focusing on one thing: turning games that were clearly designed for a desk, a mouse, a keyboard, a giant beige monitor, and a teenager with infinite free time and no internet into something you can comfortably play while lying on a couch wrapped in a blanket like a burrito. Which, scientifically speaking, is the objectively better way to play RPGs. There are lots of ways to get DOS games. I mean, you can just go to some website and find some. You can also buy lots of these games on Steam or GOG, and honestly, that's a great option if you're just playing on PC. Lots of old games are available there and you can install them and play them. The problem is that those releases are usually designed to run on Windows, and the actual DOS game files are often tangled up in launchers, installers, configuration tools, and various other bits of confusing bullcrap. Can you make it work? Maybe. Do I want to? No. You can also run Windows games on Android handhelds using apps like Game Native. It's pretty great, I use it all the time, but for DOS games, it's not gonna work. Because then you're basically using one emulator to launch another emulator so that you can play a game from 1993. It's like hiring a guy to drive you to another guy who drives you to the grocery store. Even if it did work, which it won't, you'd lose a lot of the convenience that comes from running DOS games directly through DOSBox. Things like custom controller mappings, which is, you know, the entire reason that I made this video. That's why we're here. Remember? In another recent DOS video, I showed off this ridiculous thing, my neat little floppy disk DOS emulation drive. On it is a project called ExoDOS, which is basically a massive collection of DOS games that have already been set up and configured. It's one of those projects that make you wonder if the people involved ever sleep. So what I've been doing is using this as like my base archive. I've been grabbing games from ExoDOS, copying the zip files onto my handheld, and running them through RetroArch. They're already installed, already configured, already ready to go. go. No fighting with installers, no digging through folders looking for the right exe files. They're just neat, tidy zip files that have everything all set up. Perfect for lazy dweebs like me. That's the method that I'd recommend, but honestly, get your DOS games onto your device however you want. I'm not your mom. And if I was, I'd tell you to get your DOS games onto your device however you want, because I'd be a cool mom. For the rest of this video, I'm going to assume that your games are already on your device and you're launching them through the DOSBox Pure RetroArch core. Once you've got that set up, the rest is pretty simple. Launch the game, pick the exe that you think actually starts the game, make sure that it works, and then relaunch it and set that exe as the default by pressing right on the D-pad. After that, you'll get all the nice RetroArch goodies like save states, autosaves, and auto-load and things. At that point, the DOS game basically behaves like any other ROM, which is pretty magical when you think about it. 30 years of computer nonsense reduced to a single button press. That's progress, baby! When you get into a game, you'll usually find yourself in one of 4 situations regarding the controls. Either the game already has controls set up for you, which is wonderful, or it's mostly a mouse game and generic mouse controls will work. Or it's mostly a keyboard game and generic keyboard controls will work. Or it's a game that wants mouse controls and keyboard controls and possibly a third hand. The first 3 situations are easy, obviously. Some games are automatically detected by RetroArch and already have controller mappings ready to go. To check this, you can start up your game and press in the left stick and tab over to the gamepad mapper. If the preset has the same name as your game, congratulations! Somebody else has already suffered on your behalf. If your game doesn't have a preset but it's mostly mouse driven, you can just select the mouse with left analog option. This turns the left stick into a mouse cursor. B and A become left and right click, and the triggers adjust the cursor speed. Honestly, this works kinda shockingly well. If you explain this to somebody in 1992, they'd probably think you were a wizard. I know I sure would've. If the game is mostly keyboard driven, you can instead use the generic keyboard preset. That maps common keys like the arrow keys and enter and escape and space to the handheld controls. A surprising number of DOS games become immediately playable with just that. But the 4th situation is the one we're really here for. The annoying one. The one where the game needs mouse controls and keyboard controls, including some weird keyboard buttons that no modern game would ever use unless they were doing it ironically. Those games need custom bindings. The good news is that you don't have to bind everything. If a key only gets used once in a while, just use the on-screen keyboard for that. You can bring that up at any time by pressing the left stick. What we are considering for custom bindings are the buttons you'll use very often. Movement, action, attack, interact, that kind of thing. The stuff that gets pressed every few seconds. Those are the buttons that we want on the handheld itself. When you're building a custom control scheme, the first thing that I recommend is actually just sitting there and thinking about the controls for a minute. Not playing the game, not pressing buttons, just think. Like a wizard contemplating an ancient puzzle. Because before you start binding things, you need to consider what the game actually expects from you. A lot of dungeon crawlers are pretty similar, but there's always little differences. Some use the mouse for movement, some use the arrow keys for movement, some use the numpad, some use left and right to turn, some use left and right to strafe. So before you start assigning buttons, think it through and make a plan. Think about what you actually want your hands to be doing. For example, maybe the left stick becomes your mouse cursor. A and B become left and right click. Maybe the D-pad can handle movement. Maybe X opens the inventory. Maybe Y opens the map. Start and select can become enter and escape for the main menu. Maybe you need a few function keys as well. That's usually where I start looking at the right stick and thinking about setting up a quick access shortcut menu. I showed you how to do this in my DOS on Android video. That's a fantastic place to put things that you need occasionally, like, inventory, save game, load game, character screens, or any other commands that you use sometimes but don't necessarily deserve a dedicated button. Although, honestly, most of the time there are enough buttons on modern handhelds that it isn't much of an issue. For the main controls and face buttons, the important thing is to think about frequency. What buttons are you going to press constantly? Those get prime real estate. And then what buttons are you going to press once every 20 minutes? Those can live someplace weird. Like you can put them in the quick menu or you can bring up the on-screen keyboard when you need that stuff. You don't need every key on the keyboard available at all times. You're not trying to recreate a full desktop PC. You're trying to create something comfortable and convenient. And this is a skill that you get good at pretty quickly. It usually only takes me a couple minutes to turn a handheld's controls into a convincing approximation of an entire 1993 beige computer, which is either impressive or deeply pathetic and sad, but probably a little bit of both. Just to drive it into your thick head, let's set up a real game from start to finish. For this example, I'm going to be using Eye of the Beholder, one of my favorite old school dungeon crawl series. It's a game that really wants you to use both the mouse and the keyboard. The mouse handles things like attacking, interacting, inventory management, dragging items around, while the keyboard makes moving around much faster. In other words, it's exactly the kind of game that sounds like a terrible fit for a handheld right up until you spend a few minutes messing with the controls and then realize that it's actually amazing. The first thing I do whenever I know that a game has mouse controls is immediately select the mouse with left analog preset. That gives me a mouse cursor on the left stick, left and right click on A and B, and the triggers control the cursor speed, which sounds like a pointless feature until you spend 5 minutes trying to click a tiny button and suddenly it becomes the greatest invention in emulation history. After that, I usually go back to that preset menu and choose Fill Unbound with generic keys. I love this feature because it saves me from having to manually bind like 10 things that I was going to bind anyway. So now I've got generic mouse controls and generic keyboard controls. The D-pad becomes the arrow keys, start and select become enter and escape, and a bunch of other useful stuff is already done for me. Unfortunately, Eye of the Beholder has some more stuff we need to tweak. See, in this game, left and right don't turn your character. They strafe. On the PC, actual turning is done with buttons 7 and 9 on the numpad, because of course it is. This is the part where you stop asking why old PC games did things and simply accept them for the unique, mysterious snowflakes that they are. So I remap D-pad left and right to numpad 7 and 9, and then put numpad 4 and 6, which is strafe left and right. Those go on L1 and R1. And that's it. This fixes the controls. This feels great. I can move forward and back and turn with the D-pad, and I can use the bumpers for strafing, and combat and interactions are handled entirely with the mouse. And my brain doesn't have to work too hard to remember how to do stuff on the fly, which is good because my brain can only hold so much stuff, and I've been rewatching the 1987 Ninja Turtles show, and I don't want to forget something important about the plot, you know? And honestly, that's it. That's all I would do on this game. That's the whole process. Start with generic bindings and then tweak them based on the specifics of your game. And I can't show you more games because every game is a little bit different. I can't give you a magical universal setup that works for everything. Some games only need a mouse, some only need a keyboard, some need both. No two DOS games are alike. Actually, that's not quite true. Lots of dungeon crawlers acted the same way. Lots of top-down CRPGs behave the same way. There are themes, but still, you're gonna have to customize something. But the process is always the same. Figure out what you actually use, bind the important stuff, ignore the weird stuff until later, and gradually shape the controls into something comfortable. Although, if I'm being honest, mouse with left analog plus fill unbound with generic keys solves about 90% of the problem. The rest is just you being picky. Which, if you're watching a video about DOS RPG controller mappings, I think it's safe to say that you're probably a little picky. And I say that with love. I get you. And now you have the freedom to play your old PC keyboard and mouse RPGs on the couch, or the tub, or the toilet, wherever good times are had. I actually had an entire section in this script about setting up your Android handheld to use a mouse and keyboard for DOS gaming. But I ended up cutting it because I briefly covered that in this video, and honestly, I think it deserves its own dedicated video. Kind of like this one, except focused entirely on turning your handheld into a tiny old school DOS machine and playing games the way that the ancient computer nerd gods intended. So stay tuned for that, and get subscribed if you haven't yet, so you don't miss it. I really do need to do a dedicated video on DOS RPGs someday too. I haven't played most of them enough to call myself an expert or anything, more like an amateur explorer, digging through a dumpster of old games, or more like a amateur raccoon, I guess. I love exploring this library. These games come from a time when developers were still trying to figure out what an RPG even was. Modern RPGs mostly followed the same kind of playbook. DOS RPGs feel like every developer was locked in an actual dungeon and told to invent fantasy games from scratch. Some games expect you to draw maps on graph paper. Some have enough keyboard shortcuts to feel like a flight simulator. Some shipped with manuals so large that you built your biceps by reading them. And I love that. Not because every DOS RPG is amazing. Lots of them are, but some of them aren't all that fun, to be fair. But they're all interesting. You never know what you're gonna find. And now we get to experience all that weirdness on a handheld, curled up under a blanket, acting like we're checking our email while actually spending 40 minutes trying to figure out how to open a door in a dungeon from 1992. Anyways, that's it from me. Please click the like button and the subscribe button and the notification button, and be healthy, drink some water, and get a good night's sleep. And if you can't do all those, at least do one of them, preferably the subscribe one, but honestly, hydration's important too. Okay, I'm TechDweeb, thanks for watching, bye-bye.